Okay, we're talking about the 18th century, an age of enlightenment. And look at this lovely painting of a group of guys sitting around a dining room table. Some wealthy looking people, some modest looking middle class people, maybe some working class people. And what are they doing? They're arguing, they're discussing. Symbol of freedom, symbol of hopefully rational conversation about maybe science, about politics, all of which suggest the age of enlightenment. Of course, we already encountered Descartes, and the caption has his central concern, which is to lead the mind away from the senses. The senses, taste, etc., can lead you away from rational discourse. You need to use your mind so that you can think rationally and solve problems, whether it's of problems of a physical nature, like Newton thinking about math and the universe, or a social nature, like how do we make cities cleaner, or how do we make economies more efficient, and the like. The paths to enlightenment, a major aspect in this, of course, that we'll see throughout is individuals popularizing science, trying to create a conversation and a connection between what had been purely theoretical work, in the case of people like Newton, and and a public that's increasingly looking to science to make their world better, safer, more rational, more efficient, and the like. The Enlightenment obviously is a great challenge to Christianity, the greatest challenge since the Protestant Reformation. It will also feature a new relationship between art and politics, because art, both on a high level as well as on a kind of a popular level, will um, will try to make the case for this world as a machine, a kind of an elegant, symmetrical quality that you'll see in a lot of Enlightenment art. And you'll also see an artistic transition from the Baroque period in areas like music, from composers like Bach and Handel to figures like Haydn and Mozart. There's a new skepticism in the Enlightenment, skepticism about religion, growing secularization, people who now will openly, in effect, come out of the closet as secularists. The figure here, Pierre Bayle, who says in this quote, "It's pure illusion to think that an opinion that passes down from century to century, like a religious one, from generation to generation, may not be entirely false." In other words, attacking the whole notion of you should dogmatically believe something that has been said over and over again just because it's been said over and over again. One of the things that you'll see in the Enlightenment is an increasing interest in foreign cultures and other kinds of communities, other kinds of practices. So here, this is actually a depiction of a Jewish ceremony, Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn. And it's in a book written by a man named Bernard Picard, who is interested in the history of religion and religious customs around the world, including Jewish customs. Notice, of course, that these are European Jews, probably French Jews or German Jews, who are dressed like modern European figures, but they are practicing traditional Judaism. Here's another drawing of Picard depicting Jews in the synagogue. Also, again, dressed like Europeans, but with talesum over their heads and carrying lulav and etrog. In other words, this is very different from the Middle Ages, where you might have seen art that was generated by Christian perceptions of Jews, anti-Semitic, featuring stereotypes and the like. There are no stereotypes here. Jews just look like regular people, but they're doing their Jewish religious thing. In general, there's a big impact in this period of travel literature. Because more people are traveling, because of overseas expansion, and because of mercantilism and these economic empires, you have forces like the British the British Navy that's going to far-flung places like Tahiti and in the Pacific Ocean, and Captain Cook, who's the leader of one of the most famous expeditions, writes a book called Travels. These books become very popular, And of course, as people encounter these other cultures, they develop some degree of cultural relativism about which also leads to a certain kind of religious skepticism. At the same time, as and this may strike you as ironic, it'll also generate new forms of racism and new forms of racial classification, which this picture depicts. Here is a picture of the noble savage. This is actually taken from a much larger canvas by the artist Benjamin West, the famous painting of the death of General Wolfe in 1770, the end of the French and Indian War, when the British defeat the French and the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City, which is how Britain really defeats France in its battle for the New World. Here is a nice Enlightenment image of a philosopher, an intellectual, lecturing to this group of people in the beautiful great outdoors. You see what a pastoral scene it is. He's talking to noble people. He's also talking to women. It's interesting, the women here are seen as consumers of culture. Children. Most of the people look well-to-do, but some look more well-to-do than others. In other words, the idea that says people are naturally now taking an interest in not just nature, but also in learning and enlightenment. Here's a picture taken of a kind of a group. This is presumably a somewhat imaginary picture, but what's important here is two things. One, this is a salon. In other words, this is a kind of a meeting that was convened by a woman, Madame Joffin, who is number 4 in the painting, and she's invited a series of people to her home, and she's entertaining them. But what is the entertainment? Civilized conversation, right? High-level conversation with great intellectuals like Montesquieu, Diderot, Rousseau, and the like. So let me say a word about the philosophes, these 18th century philosophers. They come from all walks of life. They're not all wealthy. They mainly are centered in Paris. They're calling for rational criticism and freedom of expression. And over time, they become increasingly radicalized in terms of not just their advocacy of rational criticism and freedom of expression, but also in political terms. They become oftentimes more anti-monarchical, right, opposing the crown, and also more strident in their attacks against religion. Montesquieu is one of the great figures who, again, becomes much more intolerant of religious intolerance. He opposes slavery. He also advocates separation of powers. In other words, he's thinking like a modern political theoretician, and figures like Montesquieu will have an impact on figures like Thomas Jefferson and the way Americans think about things like the Constitution and separation of powers. Voltaire is perhaps the most famous philosopher, who also writes in the treatise on toleration, crush the infamous thing, écraser l'infâme. He's a deist, which, of course, and we haven't spoken much about deism, but deism basically is a worldview that says that God created the world, he created nature, he created this elegant machine along the lines of what Newton had taught, and he's no longer involved in the workings of the universe. In other words, the whole notion of God as a providential figure involved in human history is a myth. All God left us is nature and nature's laws. And here in this interesting little print, we see Voltaire's muse on the upper right, who's receiving and reflecting Newton's heavenly light. Newton is the figure on the upper left, is reflecting Newton's heavenly insight down onto Voltaire, who's sitting and writing his great thoughts, seated at the table. And here's a different depiction of Voltaire, looking like this handsome philosopher, and this notion of erase the infamy, right? Crush the infamous thing that he writes in the Treatise on Toleration, 1863. These figures, these philosophers, are convene around certain kinds of cultural writing projects, like the encyclopedia, where it says or the encyclopedia or the dictionary of reason and science and art, which becomes a major weapon against the old regime. In the encyclopedia, you see science becoming more practical. So here, for example, you see a page of mathematical instruments, but these are instruments that are used not just for doing theoretical work, but also for very practical scientific engineering kinds of work. Science becomes applied, um, the idea being that just as Newton had discovered the laws of gravity for the physical universe, what would it mean to think about the social universe in legal terms, a series of laws that people could discover? So, for example, discovering the laws of economics. So the physiocrats and Adam Smith are writing books trying to figure out what is the most rational economic policy the government should adopt. This will lead them to oppose things like the guilds and mercantilism, and it will lead them to believe in this notion of the free market. David Hume will speak more of later. We'll stop here, and next time we'll pick up and talking about the later Enlightenment.